Welcome BCCY and our spoilers. Reveal that the winter wind sliced through the open space like a thin blade, carrying the damp scent of soil and the cold metallic tang of rusted guardrails. Nick stood there in a place with no audience, and yet it felt exactly like a stage built for tragedy. Behind him, a silent road leading back to the city. Ahead, the pitch-black lip of a cliff, like a mouth already open. Everything out here was wide and empty, wide enough for a fall to become a headline, empty enough for a rumor to turn into a sentence. Nick was used to bargaining in boardrooms, used to pushing numbers around like pieces on a power chessboard. But Matt wasn't an opponent for civilized deals. Matt was a walking scandal, a living stain that could brush up against the Newman name and turn it into public entertainment. Nick understood perfectly. If Matt wanted to, he could drag out detail sharp enough to crush reputations, enough to wreck agreements, enough to turn everyone in the family into a target under a microscope. That was why Nick had brought the softest solution. He could stomach money, clean and quick, no traces, as long as Matt disappeared. But in Matt's eyes, Nick saw the real danger wasn't in the secrets Matt carried. It was in the fact that Matt didn't seem to need winning in any ordinary sense. Matt only needed the sensation of controlling someone else's heartbeat, and he would do anything to keep that sensation in anything, even pushing himself to the cliff's edge in the most literal way. Nick began with restraint of someone who knew every unnecessary word could become a noose. He hadn't come to argue or threaten. He had come to end this. A sum big enough that Matt wouldn't come back, big enough to get him out of the city and out of their lives like a nightmare that knew how to dissolve before dawn. Nick didn't want to use power, and he wanted the police involved even less, because with men like Matt, the more witnesses you have, the easier it is to turn the whole thing into a long-running extortion script. He simply wanted to shove Matt out of the Newman orbit and lock that door forever. He pressed Matt to take the money, pressed him to accept a clean ending, as if signing an invisible contract would snap everything back into place. But just when Nick thought he had the direction under control, Matt revealed his true nature. He didn't step toward Nick to take anything step backward, toward the cliff. Slowly and deliberately, as if every centimeter closer to that emptiness was a warning. Loose gravel skittered under his shoes, clicking as it disappeared into the dark, reminding Nick that one more step and there would be no way back. Matt chose the dirtiest possible way to force responsibility onto Nick. Not a threat with documents or recordings, but with his own body, with the fall that could turn Nick into the man who drove someone to death in the public eye, no matter what the truth actually was. Matt angled himself outward, the wind whipping his coat so it ballooned like a sail, and all he had to do was lean. One moment, enough to create a tragedy the media would devour, enough for the Newman family's enemies to weaponize, enough to thicken the CNN story into an even denser fog. Nick felt his chest grow heavy not because he feared Matt dying, but because he understood the double trap Matt was building. If Nick rushed forward to grab him, Matt would claim assault. If Nick stood still, Matt would claim coercion. In a few short seconds, Nick saw his world squeezed into a narrow groove. Either he let Matt control him, or he accepted being smeared. And behind every option floated Sienna's name, hanging like a merciless reminder that this wasn't just a war of pride, it was a race to save a life, where every second that passed could turn into guilt. Nick didn't beg. He didn't panic. Something in his gaze hardened Nick cold and straight, like a man deciding he would not let the person in front of him tighten a stage chokehold around his throat. He invited Matt to go ahead, not because Nick wanted to gamble, but because he understood the nature of this kind of threat. It only has power when the other person is afraid. Nick let the silence stretch one beat long enough for Matt to hear the wind and the falling stones for himself, long enough that the threat no longer had the support of Nick's reaction. Nick made it clear he was willing to take the risk of involving the police, willing to have everything recorded, witnessed, dragged into the light. It was a dangerous pivot, because Nick knew light could scorch him too. But he needed Matt to understand that the jump off the cliff stunt was no longer the only lever in his hand. And then, in a move that made him even harder to read, Nick offered help, an offer that sounded humane and yet cut like a blade. If Matt wanted to walk away from here alive, Nick could pull him back, could step away from the edge with him, could make this meeting something no one ever learned about. That offer forced Matt into an immediate choice. Either he truly jumped, or he admitted it had only ever been a scare tactic. In the instant the wind shifted, Matt blinked faster, and his expression cracked like thin ice. He admitted he wasn't serious. That confession didn't make him smaller, it made him more frightening, because it proved he could stage anything without shame. Matt decided to accept Nick's offer, but in the way of a man who insisted on drawing the rules himself. He stepped away from the cliff as if he just finished testing a reaction, and liked the result. Then turned back wearing a new calm of someone who knew he'd placed Nick in a psychological position he wouldn't forget. Nick recognized it, and hated the feeling of being tested, stretched tight, forced to watch someone play with the edge like it was a knife in their hand. But Nick also knew he'd regained a sliver of control. Matt hadn't jumped. Matt still needed the money. Matt still needed an exit. And more than that, Matt still needed Nick as the courier for that exit. As long as Nick didn't show his disgust, as long as he held his composure to the end, he could steer Matt down the path he needed at least until Sienna was pulled out of the dark. But Matt wouldn't let Nick forget that the game was still in his hands. He made it clear Nick had to do everything Matt's way, not working it out together, not reaching agreement, but in order wrapped in the casual tone of someone talking about the weather. Matt laid out the structure of perfect extortion. Money first, then information, his safety first, then Sienna's safety. He spoke about leaving the country as if a flight route, a destination, and a second identity were already waiting. He instructed Nick to transfer the money to an overseas account far enough that no one could freeze it in time, murky enough to be hard to trace, pulled enough to swallow every fingerprint of the transaction. Matt set the condition that only after he saw the funds land would he reveal where Sienna was. Even the way he referred to Sienna made Nick's throat go dry, like merchandise kept in storage, like a final card held back, like something that could be moved at any moment simply to prove power. With every sentence, every condition, Matt built an invisible cage around Nick, forcing him to choose between principle and life, between what is right and what is timely. Nick agreed not because he trusted Matt, but because there was no cleaner option left. He calculated in his head like a man who had to run while assembling a bomb, making sure it detonated at the right moment and not too soon. He knew transferring the money gave Matt the advantage of escape. He knew agreeing opened the door to Matt returning in the future with new demands. But he also knew Sienna couldn't survive another round of arguing. Nick swallowed his anger like a stone, nodded, and kept his eyes steady because he could not let Matt see fear. Matt loved fear. He lived on it. Nick refused to give him that privilege. And yet, behind the calm, Nick felt as if he were stepping onto a suspension bridge, each step tightening another cable, and any cable could snap if Matt changed his mind. All Nick could do was buy enough time to find a crack, an error in the account, a leak in the plan to leave the country, a moment of carelessness born of Matt's confidence. He didn't need to win here. He only needed Sienna home before the real war began. When Nick finally left the ridge, darkness seemed to cling to his heels. The drive back to Sharon's house felt shorter than usual, but every pool of streetlight was like a heartbeat that stuttered. He hated carrying the filth of the steel into a home already riddled with fractures. Sharon's place had once been where people fell apart and found their way back up, where Nick had promised himself he would never bring more darkness. Now the darkness followed him like a soap coat he couldn't peel off. When he opened the door, the warmth inside didn't lighten him. It only made him feel as if he were dragging cold into someone else's space. Nick updated them, trying to speak with the bare minimum certainty needed to keep everyone from collapsing. But Noah, his eyes red and stretched thin by fear pushed past the limits of control, couldn't hear an update as a report. He heard it like a suspended sentence. Noah's anger erupted not over money, not over reputation. It erupted from helplessness from the thought of his sister somewhere in the hands of a man who could toy with death without blinking. Noah believed Matt would never hand Sienna over as promised. That someone who had put Nick on the edge of a cliff simply to savor his reaction would never voluntarily surrender a hostage after getting what he wanted. Noah looked at Nick like a man walking into a noose and dragging the whole family with him. His suspicion wasn't irrational. It hooked into the smallest details. An overseas account meant an escape route. An escape route meant no leverage. No leverage meant Sienna became disposable. No argued they couldn't let Matt get away. If Matt crossed the border, everything would end in the most brutal way. They would still have money, still have status, still have meetings, but they wouldn't have Sienna. and for Noah, that was unthinkable. Nick agreed with the conclusion, but he refused to let Noah drag them into a blind charge. Nick understood impatience was exactly what Matt wanted. Matt would anticipate it, prepare for it, turn that rash move into justification to punish them by moving Sienna or cutting contact. Nick agreed they couldn't let Matt escape, because if he vanished, he would become a ghost who could reappear at any time. But Nick warned Noah they had to let things unfold in order, because at this point order was no longer politeness, it was survival strategy. One step offbeat could make Matt change the rules, and changing the rules in a hostage extortion meant catastrophe. Nick needed Noah to understand that sometimes, to catch a predator, you have to pretend to be prey a little longer. He didn't demand Noah stay calm because Nick was cold. He demanded it because he was holding a fragile thread connecting them to Sienna, and a single hard yank could snap it. But Nick's warning couldn't soothe what was happening inside Noah. Desperation turned Noah into a spring compressed along, waiting for the smallest touch to explode. Noah didn't see order as a tactic. He saw it as daily another hour Sienna might suffer, another minute Matt might invent a new cruelty. Nick read it in the way Noah paced the room, in the way his fists clenched and released, in the eyes that looked like they were punishing themselves for failing to protect her. Nick felt that self-blame too, but he buried it under determination, because if his emotions shook his hands, everything would collapse. Sharon's house needed to be safe came a cramped room filled with too many ragged breaths, too many unspoken truths, and fear swelling like ink bleeding through water. And inside those walls, Nick understood something even more frightening than Matt. When the hostage hasn't come home, a family can tear itself apart just by trying to save her. Nick tried to assemble every piece into a path they could survive. He knew he had to let Matt feel like he was winning long enough to pull Sienna out, while also laying a trap so Matt didn't truly win. He pictured the next steps like rapid cuts in a film, the transfer order, the transaction trail, Matt's travel window, the point where Matt would slip. But while Nick built a plan in his head, he felt something else sliding under his feet. Noah's belief that any of this could still be controlled. Noah didn't want to hear about long games. He wanted action now, wanted exits sealed, wanted forces called in, wanted an end. And that was the most dangerous point. Not because Noah was wrong, but because Matt would exploit that instinctive righteousness to paint them as the ones who broke the deal, to make Nick the liar, to make Sienna the price. Nick looked at Noah and saw a silent promise forming in his eyes. If Nick hesitated, Noah might act on his own. And Nick knew if Noah moved at the wrong time, Matt wouldn't need to jump off a cliff to destroy them. Matt would only have to press a button, change a location, go silent for a day, and that silence would slowly kill everyone in the house. As the conversation went on, the air grew heavier, like a storm locked indoors. Nick pulled his gaze from Noah for a split second and noticed something unsettling. The quiet was too deep for a story that was already on fire. That quiet sent a chill up his spine, because Nick had learned that silence is often the space where disaster walks in. He didn't know what Matt was doing or where he was. Didn't know if Matt was changing the plan. Didn't know if Sienna was still in the same place. Each not knowing was a small cut, and stacked together they became a wound. Nick reminded Noah again that sequence was everything, that they had to let Matt believe it was all following the path he'd drawn, at least until they pulled Sienna out of his hands. But even as Nick said it, he felt a brutal truth. If Matt was reckless enough to stage a cliffside performance, he was reckless enough to break the sequence at any moment just to prove power. And if that happened, Nick would have to choose in a heartbeat between saving Sienna at any cost, or saving the family from a scandal big enough to swallow them whole. Night thickened beyond the windows, and the lights inside Sharon's house began to feel fragile, like something that could go out at any second. Nick stood caught between two forces pulling in opposite directions, Matt with his filthy rules, and Noah with his raw, honest desperation. Nick felt like a man holding a door against a beast, knowing that one wrong crack would let it surge through. He agreed they would not let Matt escape, but he also knew not letting him escape was an illusion as long as Sienna wasn't home. In this reality, Matt had the power to move. Matt had the power to go silent. Matt had the power to choose the moment that would drive them mad. And when Nick saw Noah stop moving, his eyes going dark as if he'd made a decision he didn't need to announce, and Nick realized the tension was concentrating on the most dangerous point of all. Not the ridge, not the offshore account, but the moment someone in that house could no longer endure a sequence. If Noah broke the rhythm, Matt would strike. If Matt struck, Nick would lose his right to choose. And if Nick lost that right, The price might no longer be money or reputation, it might be Sienna disappearing into the very emptiness Matt had leaned over while a wind screamed, like a prophecy waiting to become real. Sienna's life is no longer sheltered by any safe perimeter. It hangs in the air like a thin thread stretched between darkness and a decision that could change everything. She doesn't know where she is, doesn't know how much time has passed, and certainly doesn't know what the people outside are trading away for even the smallest chance of finding her. Inside a cheap motel room, a jaundiced yellow lamp washes everything in a tired, aged hue, turning the space both claustrophobic and strangely cold, like the room itself has agreed to keep the secret. Sienna lies motionless on the bed, her sleep deep and heavy like an invisible lock sealing her off from the world, leaving her with no way to protect herself. Her breathing is steady, but faint, occasionally fluttering as if to prove she is still here. Still Olivian, that fragile proof only makes everything around her more terrifying, because one small misstep could snap that thread before anyone has time to catch it. Annie Stewart sits in the corner, not close enough to look eager, not far enough to lose control. She watches Sienna the way someone watches a valuable possession, yet there is no mercy in her gaze, only the focus of a person who understands that power doesn't always come from violence, but from the ability to make a victim doubt herself, to collapse from the inside without a single blow being thrown. Annie doesn't make noise, doesn't flood the air with frantic phone calls, doesn't reveal impatience. She lets silence do the work for her, lets the motel become a sealed box that steals Sienna's sense of time, so that when she wakes she won't know what's real and what's planted, what's memory and what's manipulation. Annie has chosen to be in a lie, and her complicity isn't loud. It moves smoothly, like dark water quiet, deliberate, and capable of dragging a mind under without leaving a ripple. The door opens, dragging in a gust of cold and the damp scent of the street. Matt returns like someone who has just walked out of a dangerous game and come back to display his prize. There's no frantic edge to him, no fear of being caught. Instead, each step carries a sickening satisfaction, as if he has just forced the world to kneel on cue. He tells Annie every detail of his deal with Nick, how Nick tried to make it a clean transaction, how he restrained himself to keep panic from showing, how he swallowed pride and accepted a filthy set of rules. Matt speaks like he's recounting a performance in which he played the lead, and the more he talks, the brighter his eyes become with the thrill of knowing he has pressed his fingers into someone else's weakness. In every detail, Matt isn't simply boasting about the money, he's boasting about the moment he cornered Nick into choosing, about the feeling of watching a man like Nick step exactly where Matt pointed, even if only for now. But what chills the room isn't the amount of money, it's Matt's brutal honesty when he admits he has decided to take the Newman money. He no longer pretends this is for Sienna, no longer hides behind any thin moral cover. To Matt, the money is proof of victory, a stamp receipt showing he can take what he wants from the most powerful family in town. And yet, immediately after that confession, something even more frightening slips into his tone. He doesn't know or refuses to know whether he will actually give Sienna back. That deliberate vagueness lands like a blade laid across the throat of the room, because it turns Sienna from a hostage for money into a variable. A variable means Matt can change his mind. A variable means Sienna can be held longer, moved, used for the next demand, or erased entirely so no one can ever tell this story. In that instant, Annie understands she isn't partnering with mere extortion, she's standing beside a mind with no boundaries, where someone else's life is just a game piece to be discarded the moment it stops being useful. And Matt doesn't stop there. He weighs what he calls the $1,000,000 question the way someone weighs options on a menu. He speaks about Noah with no personal heat, no moral hesitation, only the cold arithmetic of convenience. Is Noah a future risk? Could Noah disrupt the plan's rhythm? Could Noah become the one who tracks him down, the one who keeps Matt from vanishing out of the country? The questions don't need answers to thicken the air into something suffocating, because the fact that Matt is even considering whether to let Noah live means the line has already been pushed to its most extreme edge. Once someone treats a human life as a strategic choice, everything around them becomes unpredictable, and safety turns into a lie people tell themselves to stay calm. Annie listens, and it's the way she listens that's truly frightening. No sharp inhale, no protests, no shock the way any normal person would react to talk of life and death. Annie is simply quiet, as if she is sorting information into neat drawers in her mind. The deal is set, the money will come, Nick is being forced to follow the sequence. Noah might become the disruption. She glances at Sienna sleeping and sees the truth with unsettling clarity. Sienna isn't only a hastagi, it's the psychological lever keeping everyone outside off balance. As long as Sienna lies here, Nick will keep conceding. As long as Sienna lies here, Noah will be pressed closer to the edge of breaking. And in that moment, Annie recognizes that the real weapon isn't a gun or a rope, but the extension of helpless waiting stretching of fear until people start destroying themselves just to make it stop. Sienna keeps sleeping, unaware that above her, an invisible negotiation is turning her life into a condition, her future into a tool. Her breathing remains steady, fragile, as if life itself is trying to prove it can exist despite everything. But every minute inside that room feels like another tightening loop, another pull of the rope around fate. Because if Matt has already begun to weigh Noah as a $1,000,000 question, then the next step won't be a question at all. It will be a decision. And once that decision is made, no one can predict how Matt will choose to make it realquate as fog or sudden as a fall into the abyss. The only certainty is that time is siding with whoever is more ruthless, and each passing second is pushing everyone closer to the moment when the deal stops, meaning anything leaving only raw survival, and the price they will be forced to pay. On our YouTube channel, I'm always looking for content inspiration for each video by compiling short video clips to analyze and offer my personal opinions. This channel specializes in analyzing, hypothesizing, and discussing plot points in the series The Young and the Restless from the perspective of a long-time fan through this. Viewers may gain more insightful, objective, and interesting perspectives. Please subscribe to stay updated on the latest news about the series The Young and the Restless.